beginning with how we should treat our sacred grounds, we bring you today's presentation, in which our three wonderful speakers will tell us, through their own stories, why they consider ground to be so sacred, and how, in simple, sustainable, and eco-friendly ways, we can create and maintain beautiful sacred grounds around our places of worship and wherever else possible. Now I'll introduce our speakers to you. Our first speaker, the Reverend Canon Jason Oden, is the diocesan canon of formation for the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio. He's also the parish pastor for the Church of the Advent in Walnut Hills. We will hear from the Reverend Canon Jason Oden what inspires him to care for creation and why he incorporates it into not just his own life, but also into the mission of the congregation. As a pastor, he inspires his congregation to believe that just as it is important to restore our relationship with God and each other, it is equally important to restore our relationship with the earth. He has shown his congregation how this can be done with their collective effort by beginning to look at the green space on their church property as a place to begin this work of repairing and healing relationships. Our next speaker will be Lyric Morris-Latchaw. Lyric is a multidisciplinary urban farmer and visual artist whose work focuses on creating meaningful, equitable relationships between neighbors, land, and creatures. She currently tends the Church of the Advent's Good News Garden, which is a community pantry garden in Walnut Hills, growing food for a sliding scale payment, community-driven CSA or community-supported agriculture. Lyric previously farmed for and collectively ran the pay-as-you-can pizza restaurant Moriah Pie. She is co-author of the Moriah Pie cookbook, Recipes and Stories. She was also the co-founder of the Hughes Macmillan Street Community Garden and helped establish Wave Pool Gallery's community garden and grass room. Lyric's presentation will complement that of the Reverend Canon Jason Oden, as both will speak to their work on the sacred grounds of the Church of the Advent in Walnut Hills. And finally, we will hear from Susan Fox, who's a registered landscape architect and horticulturist, having worked for 30 years, mostly in residential landscape design and construction. She has a passion for ecology, native plants, and how ordinary people can arrange their environments to be nourishing to both people and the natural world. Susan will also address, like our other speakers, why we should treat our grounds as sacred. She will tell us through her own church's story of how, when caring people treat earth with love and reverence, we can make a wonderful impact on improving lives in our community and the health of our planet, our loving Mother Earth. Friends, I hope you will enjoy this presentation. And Jason, I'll hand this over to you now.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you to all of you who have shown up tonight to listen to us. I mean, kind of why I'm here, I think, is really to tell my story and to tell you all about why I do what I do, and from the perspective of a religious leader. And the thing that I really want to emphasize tonight is the importance of kind of knowing your why, like why you do it. And because one of the biggest, I think, challenges and one of the biggest expectations was for me when I started at Church of the Advent a couple of years ago was I had to be able to explain what I believed and how that was connected to what we believed as Episcopalians. I'm an Episcopal priest. I've been an Episcopal priest since 2019. I was ordained a deacon in 2018. That's kind of, you start off as a deacon and then you become a priest in the Episcopal Church. It's the same for the Catholic Church as well. But that was, the onus was on me. When I came into this congregation, I had to explain what I believed, why it mattered to me, and how it was a part of what we believe as Christians, and especially as Episcopalians. And so I want to share with you the importance of knowing your why. For about 4 or 5 hours, right before this webinar, I sat down with a few other religious leaders and people on a task force. We have a diocesan task force called Creation Care and Environmental Justice Task Force. And then also with a group from Sewanee in Tennessee. It's a seminary, it's an Episcopal seminary, and a group called the Center for Religion and Environment. We all got together because we are working on a diocesan project that eventually we want to turn into an ecumenical project that for nation, for the nation, for anybody, actually for anybody on our earth to use. We're working on a project that instructs everybody, on why it is important, why creation care is important, and also to emphasize why creation care is not something new. It's not something trend. It's not something that is disconnected from what we believe as Christians. And I certainly know that, and again, I can only speak from my experience, and I can only speak from my understanding as a Christian about my Christian faith. But as someone who has taught world religions on the college level, and as someone who has studied world religions, I know that all of the world religions understand, the earth to be something that is very connected to them as individuals, but also to their faith and to their religious community. And the care of creation is inherent and integral, is integrated into the belief and moral values of all faiths. But from speaking from my perspective and from my experience as an Episcopal priest, what is really important to me, and what's important to this task force and to this whole project, is to say, creation care is integrated into what we believe already. It's not something that we have to, contrive and kind of force this square peg into this round hole, and we got to make it work. It's just naturally and inherently a part of what we believe. And when I came to the Church of the Advent, I had to really clearly lay that out. Now, I'm not saying that members of the congregation didn't already understand that. Certain members, in fact, I've noticed there's a few here from my congregation in the audience tonight, and I certainly know that they already had an awareness of that. But it was really important for me to be able to link everything that I talked about around creation care back to my values and these pillars that I hold to. And some of these pillars, I mean, I thought through them. The first one was just my sacred text. I mean, my sacred text is just full of, just of references, and implied in the text is just this notion that the creation is good. And especially in the first, the book of the Old Testament, which my sacred text is, the Old Testament and the New Testament. But in the first book of the Old Testament, in Genesis, and in the first creation story, something that is really, that, like the statement in that creation story is that God created and called it good. And sometimes as Christianity developed over 2,000 years, sometimes that got away from people's understanding and wanted to to say that religion or Christianity was simply just something about the spirit or something about the immaterial world, and that the actual material world was not good, or maybe the material world was flawed and broken, and it is broken in many ways, and that's part of our work, is to restore that, but that there's something inherently bad about it. And I want to say, no, the scripture is very clear, that my sacred text is very clear, that when God created the earth, that it's good. And ultimately what happens is, in the story and the narrative of my sacred text, is we find out that we as humans actually contribute to kind of this brokenness of the earth. And so, you know, as the story unfolds, there's relationships are broken. And that's a big part of my narrative as a Christian, is that our relationship between God and humans and other humans is broken. And I think it's important to also add that our relationship with the earth is broken. And that's very clear today, that relationships are broken. You know, not only, you know, that our relationships with God is broken, but with each other and with the earth. And sometimes I think some people think that religion is just really dealing with that first one, that relationship with God, that religion is all about just trying to make sure that you're right before God, or right before a God, or right before some kind of ultimate, being. And it's just about that relationship. And I had to make it clear that, that within our scripture, but also in our prayer book, there's this section in our prayer book called the Catechism, where we learn a little bit more about our faith. And unique to the Episcopal Church is that we don't really pride ourselves on being a confessional church. That is, we don't have like, you have to believe this. We really allow for a spectrum of beliefs. We really focus on what is our purpose and what is our mission. And in that catechism, the statement is, the mission of the church is to restore unity, to restore relationships between God and each other, and then also the earth. And so that was another like pillar. So that first one was the sacred scripture, and there's that is particularly that one text, but there were many other, scriptures in the sacred text that I could go to, but also then going to my prayer book. And then there's this third thing about, it's called our baptismal covenant. And when you're baptized, it's the baptismal covenant is just an expression of what you're really committing to and what you're covenanting, not only with God, but with the earth and with each other. And part of one of the statements in our baptismal covenant, one of the things that we do as Episcopalians is we not only recite this baptismal covenant when we're baptized, but we also throughout the year we are reminded of our baptismal covenant, and we reaffirm it and we recommit to it. And one of the things in our baptismal covenant, one of the statements is just that we treat all people with dignity, and that we strive for justice. And justice is a big part of my understanding of creation care, because there's a sense of environmentalism where maybe it's kind of trendy to to care for the environment and to try to do things that are environmentally friendly. And then there's another issue about just environmental justice and how do we, how does climate change impact people? Because the way we care for the earth really impacts the way we care for each other. And so those were the pillars. I mean, those are the things that I went back to and gave me a structure and gave me a focus and the scaffolding for which I had to talk about why I do what I do around creation care and why that's so integrated into the work. Because the sacred text tells us, because it's a part of my baptismal covenant, it's a part of the mission of the church. But also, it's about justice, it's about people, and that our whole work as Episcopalians, as Christians, is to restore relationships. And the environment is a big part of that work, not only with the earth, but also restoring our relationship with people and restoring our relationship with God, because God is, as I believe, the source of all that we have, including our earth. So knowing your why, that's really important. And I think, one of the things I was asked to talk about are some of the challenges. When I came to Church of the Advent, it wasn't so much that we looked at our our grounds and said, how can we use these to care for the earth? I really looked at my community, like how can we participate in the mission of the church in relation to our community? And now that also certainly includes our immediate grounds. And so one thing we did was we always treated our lawn and with just chemicals, but then we shifted that, to try to really make sure that that's an environmentally friendly treatment. It's funny because where I live, my house, I live in this neighborhood where I think I'm the only person on the street that doesn't treat my lawn with chemicals. And I'm the only person on my street where birds are in my lawn eating. And I was talking to my wife, we were walking down the street, I'm like, I wonder why that we only see birds in our lawn. And we don't have any, we don't have anything to prove this, but our theory, our conjecture is that it's because we don't treat our lawn and they can actually eat it. Now, I don't know any data, so I can't say that, but that's our theory. But that was important that we make sure that the way that we take care of our grounds is something that we do it in an environmental friendly way, and one that is concerned about how the effects of the earth when we do it, or how it affects the earth when we do it, and how it affects our environment. Another way that what we did was we invited a part of the Green Umbrella is the organization that the Common Orchard to plant an orchard on our lawn, so that eventually as these trees grow, that these trees can be foraged and the fruit trees can be foraged, and a way to deal with food insecurity. And that's a big part of our mission too at Church of the Advent, is to understand our work of restoring relationships by also working towards justice, and also working to mitigating food insecurity in our neighborhood, and environmental work. And Lyric is going to talk a lot more about this, and the connection between food justice and food insecurity. Mitigating food insecurity is connected to the earth and the way we treat the earth and how we source from the earth. That's all a part of it. And just even understanding, and going back to that baptismal covenant where we treat everybody with dignity, we want to make sure that what we're offering to people is grown, in a way that is inherently, just inherently ethical and moral, and it reflects what we believe about each person. Each person has value, and that we want to make sure what we're giving to them is pure, is good, is not full of chemicals, and not grown in an unethical and unsustainable way. But part of my challenges of coming in, and I think this goes back to the whole know your why, and I don't know how much time I have left, so Fred, you tell me if I need to stop. Is it really goes back, like there were so many times when I had to I had to pitch this idea, and it wasn't that necessarily that the people that I was telling it to didn't believe me, or I wasn't preaching to the choir, or didn't hold the same values and hold to the same objectives and desires for creation care and for us to function this way. It's just that I had to make sure I knew what, I had to be very clear about why it was important to me, and why we as a congregation had to make really important decisions that reflected what our values were. And so I would just encourage you that if you start to incorporate, creation care, intentional creation care, and you be very mindful and conscious of it, and you think about all the ramifications, it most likely is going to change the way you make decisions, your priorities, how you function. And sometimes it's going to cost a little bit more. You're going to have to sacrifice here. You're going to have to make a lot of changes there. And before you really can do that, and before you can get everybody on board, you really got to know why it's important. And it's really got to be, what I would say, theologically rooted, like rooted in something that's really foundational. Another thing that I was asked to do is just really, how can it, creation care contribute to to the ministry of the church, especially around formation. And that's actually in my title as a canon, which just means I'm on the bishop's staff here in the Episcopal Church, is that I just think creation care, I mean, youth, and I think Lyric can talk a little bit about this as well. I don't know if you're planning on it, Lyric, so I'm not forcing you to do that. But I know that in my work in formation, I've worked with adults, I've worked with kids, I've worked with youth. It's always been connected to growing plants. I mean, if you're talking about spiritual growth and formation, it's so easy to connect it back to the earth. So I just think you can't go wrong, establishing these values and these principles of creation care in the work that you do. I just think it's important, and I just want to encourage you to really know why you do it, and to really be able to lay it out, and to really be able to connect it back to the sacred text, the purpose of why you even come together as a community, and to the mission of that community. So that's all I got.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jason. That was really inspiring. I really like the fact that you consider creation a relationship with creation. Bringing that, it elevates creation to a different level by thinking. And I haven't been thinking along creation along those lines. So you taught me something today. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, great.
Lyric, you can go next.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Lyric. As Jason mentioned, I work for him at the Church of the Advent. I am the tender of our Good News Garden there. And I've been farming and running various urban gardening and farming projects for about 5 years now. So I'm going to touch really briefly on a little bit of the why, but for the most part, I'm going to be talking more about some practical suggestions and tips and applications for different people's grounds to put this into action. So are my slides up? Oh, great. There we go. Okay, I'm not going to read this whole quote to you. I know it's kind of long, but I just wanted to start with this. If you want to go ahead and read through it. For me, in moments when this kind of work feels very hopeless, thinking about the fact that the land has a history and the land has a future, and I exist right in the precipice of that, is a thought that can really help me to keep moving, to know that every day I am not taking action, I'm not changing my relationship to land, is another day that is becoming history and becoming the story of what has been. And as soon as I can begin to shift, even in small ways, even when I look around at the climate crisis and feel so overwhelmed, to think that I am actively creating the future of our land in relationship with the creatures, with my neighbors, is a lot of what keeps me going. I will say right here that this organization, the Agrarian Trust, if you can see it, they have put out a really incredible document called the Faithlands Toolkit that I would highly suggest to anyone in this group. It's all about exactly what we're talking about tonight. It's a 150-page, beautiful document for faith communities of all traditions about these exact issues, how we can better steward our land, why we should better steward our land. Lots of practical advice, lots of big picture advice. I really cannot recommend that enough. I hope that a link to that ends up in the chat. All right, next slide. So the very brief thing I wanted to add to what Jason said, I know that not everyone on this call is Christian, identifies as Christian, but I did want to touch briefly on part of why this work is so important to me as a Christian. I do think that Christian communities do have maybe an even deeper obligation in America to pursuing this work because of our history. If you are familiar with the doctrine of discovery, it was a doctrine created by the Catholic Church during the time when Europeans were settling in America, and basically said that any nation that was led by a Christian monarch had the right to forcibly seize and take over any land that they came upon. It was sort of saying that that was a morally and ethically and religiously okay thing for Christians to do. And if we follow that action through to today, the land was taken from people who were tending it in sustainable, thoughtful ways for thousands of years. And really quickly, that action led to the Industrial Revolution and the industrial agricultural system, and a lot of the big sort of overwhelming systems that we can point to today as having really huge impacts on the way our land is currently depleted and aching. And so, I don't think it's as simple as to say this is Christians' fault, but I do think that we in America at least have a really deep, long, direct history to the misuse and mistreatment of the land. And I think that's an extra reason for us to pursue this work and pursue it reparatively, trying to right a bit of what we've wronged. Next slide. So before I get into the practical tips, one thing I wanted to sort of say that is going to frame everything else is thinking through this idea that when we engage really in any way with society, everything has a cost. And when I go to engage with my land, if something feels really fast and really easy, there is still a cost. Even if it's cheap, fast, easy, that cost is just being put onto someone else. Maybe it's overseas workers who aren't being paid or treated well. Maybe it's the cost then falls to the earth and to the water. And I think when we start to think about that in the context of how we make decisions in relation to land, it really opens us to a different way of engaging. One thing all faith communities have in common is that we are communities. We are made up of people. So kind of a practical example of this, your trash. Maybe it's fast and cheap and easy to just throw everything in the trash. We don't have to look at it. We don't have to think about it. But where is the cost? If we're not paying the cost, the earth is paying the cost in that case. If we can retake on part of the cost through the time it might take to set up recycling, maybe the monetary cost of setting up recycling, the time cost of sorting things out, we can start to think about deferring that cost from the environment onto ourselves. So that frames a lot of the ways I think about these decisions. We're investing energy, time, speed for the sake of removing the burden of our decisions from other people in the land. Next slide. So starting to get into some of these practical things. One thing that I think about a lot in my work is scavenging materials. Again, the fast, easy option is generally to go and buy what we need. And instead, how can we look around at what we have and what is available to us? Inputs my background is a lot in more agricultural work, growing food, but a lot of this I'm trying to tailor also to people who might not have gardens, but are doing any kind of landscaping really. So wood chips, rather than going out and buying mulch that is coming from far away, being shipped here, often being dyed, then we're driving it back to our gardens and things. There's wood all around us. So a lot of times if you can contact arborists, they have taken down trees that they are more than glad to get rid of. They'll have chips that they'll drop off to you for free. For folks in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Department of Urban Forestry takes down trees in city areas that are no longer needed, and they'll generally deliver loads of wood chips for free, particularly to nonprofits like faith communities and community gardens. Trying to think through reducing plastic in our landscaping and gardens in any way possible. So here's a photo example of using logs that are trimmed as edging rather than buying plastic edging. Trying to find as many used materials as possible, just sort of when you have a need, before you decide to buy something, thinking, where does this need already exist in the world that it's just becoming trash? So things like trellises, pots, tools even, they're sort of in abundance all around us. It just takes a commitment of time to get them to us. So in the Cincinnati area, Habitat for Humanity, Building Value, it resells like architectural elements and fencing, all kinds of things like that. And the Cincinnati Recycling and Reuse Hub, similarly. All of these are in the tips document that I think everyone's getting at the end of this talk, but you could also screenshot this if you wanted it. And then another part of that is just planning ahead for storage so that we're not buying supplies, not having anything to do with them in the off season or through the winter, and then finding it's easier to just throw them away, especially bulky garden things, and then just buying them again in the spring, which I think is a pattern a lot of people fall into. The next slide. Yeah, so thinking a bit through plants and planting in a landscape, I've made a big list here. I'm not going to read through them, but of native and or pollinator friendly plants that are really low maintenance, perennial plants that can easily be included into landscaping that you might already have on your grounds. These are all, really low maintenance, things that you can put in the ground once. They're beautiful. They won't take a lot of tending, maybe a little bit of pruning, and will be better suited for pollinators and fixing nitrogen in the soil than a lot of the sort of decorative annuals that have become really common in the ways that we tend to landscape in America. And then another thing is considering or questioning your lawn. I know that Susan is going to talk more about this, but green space is not necessarily bad, especially in faith communities. Having a hospitable, flat, soft space for people to gather can be really important and really inviting. So just thinking through the why and how of maintaining lawns, I think is a big step. So a very practical suggestion that has worked well for me in the past is looking to Dutch white clover. That's the little white clover that you see everywhere. You can buy the seed for so cheap, and if the plant never really grows very tall, so it doesn't even, in theory, it wouldn't really require any mowing, which is pretty amazing if you had it sown thickly. It's soft, the pollinators love it. It fixes nitrogen in the soil, which is taking nitrogen essentially from the atmosphere and making it available to other plants, which is a really necessary process. And it doesn't require the same care with fossil fuel inputs and water as a grass lawn. So what I do with it, you don't need to go out and rip up your whole lawn, but when I have areas that become muddy or patchy, I just sort of take some seed, sprinkle it in. It wants to spread, it wants to find a way. So there in the bottom, you can kind of see an area where it's the sort of back 2/3 of that is the Dutch white clover that's just creeping in and filling in those grassy areas. It'll sort of slowly do that. So that's a plant that I really love and recommend to people maintaining green spaces. Next slide, Joey. Another simple thing that I think is a good first step for faith communities is beginning to think about your food waste. Often faith communities are having shared meals and events, and how can we, rather than sending our food waste to landfills, have it become part of a more productive and insular system. I tried to put my formatting got a little weird, but I tried to put a couple different options here to show that you might have different abilities as far as like time and space, and there are options. These things don't have to mean like starting a farm on your faith grounds. On the left there, you could see like an open compost system. So the bin is separated into 3 sections: step 1, step 2, step 3. The food and green materials are added on the far left there. In the middle, you can see the stuff that was previously heaped and is sort of cooking or breaking down. And then on the right, you can see the compost that's fully broken down. And in this system, you just sort of rotate through what you're taking from and what you're adding to. For a lot of people, this might not be realistic. You might not have a space. You might have rodent or pest issues. You might not have the time to turn a pile like this. A tumbler is another great option that is a little bit lower maintenance. So in that second picture, you can see this is a really large 2-section tumbler that I have at my house, actually. You put food in one side, similar to the 3-step system. You've got food in one side and finished compost in the other side. And this has a big handle on the side. So it's closed off. No creatures can get into it. And you also just turn a big crank rather than needing to shovel. And for people who even that might not be realistic, there are composting services out there. Here in Cincinnati, we have a really incredible organization called Queen City Commons, where you pay them a small fee and they come weekly, bring you a big bin. You put all your food waste into it, they'll collect it, and they manage all the composting, all the dirty stuff, and then distribute that compost to small farms and community gardens. So you are not, maybe that's an easier place for you to put the cost, is the money in that case, rather than the labor or the space or the mess. So again, just trying to reiterate that there are a wide range of options. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so then I was just going to talk about a few partnerships I've been a part of with faith communities and growing food. I think that a lot of faith communities, I know of, Jewish communities, Muslim communities, Christian communities, and I'm sure there are many others just in the Cincinnati area who have been engaged in growing food and see food justice and land restoration as part of like a vital part of their spirituality. So this garden, the Hughes McMillan Street Community Garden, was part of a church I used to be a part of. We had a lot of people who were interested in gardening in the congregation, and we were right across the street from Hughes High School. The church itself had no land, not even like a square foot of grass, just sidewalks. It's in Clifton, very urban area. But there was this green space right across the street. So we approached Hughes High School and said, hey, can we start a community garden on this land? The grass was often getting really overgrown on this hill, and nobody really went on this side of the school. So we thought it would be a great way to engage the space. And it was such an incredible collaboration. The way this worked, individuals from the church rented plots, grew food there, and then the students from the school also came out in the spring and in the fall and would do like biology lessons in the garden, and would help us with like work days doing projects and things. So they were great because they were a good labor source for us, also a bunch of teenagers who needed to get off a bunch of steam. Yeah, next slide. So this is the garden that I'm working on currently with Jason through Church of the Advent. These are mostly old photos. This is actually our first season for Church of the Advent tending this garden. It's previously been run by a few different organizations, most recently Vitality Cincinnati. But it's a really beautiful garden, a couple blocks from the church grounds, with raised beds and a really amazing rainwater catchment system. And so this model is different. We are growing food for our church's food pantry and for other food pantries and food access sites in our neighborhood. So rather than church members renting plots, growing their own food, volunteers are coming from the church and from the community and growing food that's all donated to people in need. Jason mentioned this briefly, but our church is in a neighborhood that has really poor food access. Until very recently, the only place you could buy produce in the neighborhood was Dollar General, or you could buy food really, and they just added a little bit of produce. So not great options after they tore down the Kroger that used to be in Walnut Hills. So this work is even more important there, and is also just a great way for us to connect with people in the neighborhood through distributing food, but also through gardening, people who wander by and want to see what we're doing. Next slide. And then, yeah, Jason also mentioned this, but we did recently install a community orchard on the grounds of the church. So on the left there, you can see kind of a bird's eye view. This is right outside the main door into our sanctuary. And yeah, we worked with the Common Orchard Project. They help all kinds of different communities install these public orchards. So they helped us put in 7 fruit trees and a bunch of perennial herbs and shrubby things, and we installed this in November. So this is our first year. You can see in the middle picture the trees are little spindly babies, but they're growing. And I think planting trees is a really beautiful act of hope, because even if we don't all see that, it's just a very long-term way to grow food. It's providing for people in the long-term future in a way that I think is really beautiful and connects you to the longer story of your neighborhood and your neighbors and the land. Yeah, so I think that's the end of what is that the last slide? Yeah.
Thank you
That's
so
what I
much,
got to
Lyric.
say.
That
Yeah.
was really informative. And it's not just for people to use in their religious organization facilities, but even people can use the tips you've given at home. I made a note of a few things you mentioned. I'm going to try and apply it now at my home.
Great.
Lastly, we have Susan Fox. Susan, go ahead. Um,
So, hello everyone. I think Fred introduced me well, so I'm just going to get right into my story. So the sort of the basic gist, I think, Jason said it right. The why is really, really important. So since so many faiths see it, so the earth is sacred, I would say, to all cultures. I mean, maybe it's hard to say all, but I'm pretty sure all cultures and faiths, the earth and then all that is in it was created by God. Next slide. It feeds us. It feeds us body and soul. It feeds all of the earth creatures. Our sacred earth inspires us to keep ourselves sacred by keeping a balance between our body, mind, and spirit. It inspires us to live in harmony within ourselves and with everything around us. What more do we need to say? Next slide. Modern life and Western culture. There has been a disconnect between many people and the planet that feeds us all. Next. So how can we, as individuals, at our places of worship, at our homes, at our businesses, talking to our neighbors, friends, and coworkers, how can we treat our ground as sacred? Next. When I start to work at our church's gardens or at our forest or in my own yard, I stop and first remember and acknowledge that I am walking on sacred ground. It helps me frame my thoughts and actions. It will help you frame yours. Next. So again, as mentioned before, we know our audience comes from many, many faiths. But I would agree with Lyric that the Christian Bible early on in our creation stories were for hundreds of years translated in such a way that had to do with power and who has the right to do things. And it actually uses the word that people shall have dominion over the planet. So that kind of sounds like you have the right to do anything you want. But recently there have been more accurate translations. And instead of saying dominion, it says more something like protect and steward. That is what humans are called to do for God's creation. Next. So how can we put this into practice? Many simple ways. And again, even though we're talking to people from various faith communities, realize that all this information is applicable to any place where people live, work, play. And if you don't have any ground in your place, talk to people who do. So everyone has a part to play. Next, please. Imagine the entire area of New England in mown turf. That's a lot. Turf doesn't feed anybody or anything. It doesn't sequester carbon. It doesn't help return water to the ground. As my background in landscape construction, we refer to it as green concrete, because pretty much water falls on and just runs off. Most of it doesn't do anything other than look green and neat. Our church has 3 acres of lawn, which we have mowed for 40 years. That's just what you do to lawn, right? You mow it. But recently, like several other people who have said today, we have had a shift on how we view our lawn. Next. So this little picture, no way can you read all the details, but the average person walking down on the ground just will have no awareness or probably knowledge of the amazing life that is below your feet on good, healthy soil. A lot of the stuff we walk on is pretty dead, but animals and plants that are all in relationship with each other and the above ground plants. It is truly an amazing community. So one, we would, like I said, it really encouraged to not use fertilizers or pesticides. Fertilizers are salts and they kill microorganisms that would otherwise feed your lawn. And most fertilizers come from petrochemicals, which themselves contribute to climate change. And many pesticides are applied preventatively, whether or not there is a pest present. And it is okay. Many lawns are just fine with a small amount of pests. We have developed this idea that all apples are perfect and all lawns are perfect, but that is not nature. And like Lyric says, there's always a cost, and that cost is borne by someplace or someone or those birds that are not in your lawn. So there's no need to blast an entire lawn for a small pest presence. Next. Okay, the EPA says that gas-powered lawnmowers are 11 times more polluting than a new car. There's just no regulations for lawnmowers. That is, hour per hour. It's a big car, little lawnmower, 11 times. So consider then often in midsummer when the lawn is not growing hardly at all, people cut it anyway. Not really cutting much lawn, but the pollution happens still. Next, please. So it can take a shift in attitude, but it's really not that hard to create two different categories of lawn and realize we have 3 acres of lawn, but this could happen even in a postage stamp lawn. So you put the areas around buildings, pavement, use areas mowed regularly, while the grass that maybe is only looked at or in the distance can be mowed at half the frequency of the higher impact areas. We are used to seeing this in parks, golf courses, stuff like that, but we don't think about it, doing it where we live. You might want to communicate with your members of your house of worship of what you're doing and why, emphasis on the why. Make the border between the 2 different areas intentional so the neighbors don't think you just didn't finish or forgot. And also, as I said, you can do this at your homes too. Just think of it like a planting bed. Instead of mulch with shrubs or flowers or whatever, you have a bed of taller grass. Out in the neighborhood where we live, a lot of people have woods in their back. So you could even just have a bed of taller grass. So it may not be a lot to begin with, but that little bed can get bigger and bigger, and then you can talk to your neighbors. Definitely tell your neighbors what you're doing. So you can have an impact. So this one is a park, and the picture on the right happens to be a post office in downtown Loveland. Next, please. And even though we're doing the why is for the care of God's creation, for some an extra little bonus can be it saves money. So not only are these practices better for the environment, they will also save you money, especially if you hire mowing or treatment services. And it will definitely save you time if you do it yourself. And best of all, it gives you the fulfillment of seeing yourself as the steward and caretaker of God's creation. Next. And I'm going to agree with Lyric. Clover, it's wonderful. People used to plant clover intentionally with lawns, and somewhere along the line, somebody decided that it's a weed, probably someone who wanted to sell herbicides, because it provides nitrogen to the ground, feeds the lawn. That's why you don't have to fertilize your lawn. And it is a great nectar source. And like Lyric says, you can either start all from scratch or just transition as you're doing lawn repairs. Next. Definitely would encourage you not to irrigate. Water is sacred and it is a scarce commodity. We don't maybe think of that here. We haven't had droughts for a while, but you just think it really is. Lawns and landscaping, for the most part, do just fine without the extra water. At our church, we never water a lawn. Again, saves money. Next, please. So picture here is of an urban heat island. So this may be known to some of you and may be a totally new term to others. But the idea is that wherever you have lots of pavement, asphalt, concrete, roof, it is a lot hotter. And if you live out in the suburbs where there's lawn and trees, it's not as bad. But when you live in some of the other subdivisions or neighborhoods, often closer to the inner city, you have fewer trees and it is hotter there, and hotter often has a deleterious effect to health. So, you know, even again, back out in the suburbs, just think of how large your parking lot is. That is potentially contributing to it. Next, please. So trees can be utilized as a way to save on heating and cooling bills, as well as reducing overall heat island effects, which, as I said, is increased temperatures around acres of asphalt, especially in the urban areas. Next, please. People have used trees from time immemorial to cool their houses. And they actually used to build houses in a particular way, so the natural cooling. But since the advent of air conditioning, much of this design has been abandoned. So be sure to plant trees, though, that aren't too big and will have deleterious effects on the building. So this is actually a picture I talk about planting trees to slow down the winter winds, which can wick away heat from the house. You think your houses or your buildings are tight, they leak heat. So the more that is wicked away, the more you are paying to heat it and the more for the environment, et cetera. Next, please. So native trees provide some of the best habitat and food for many animals, including insects, which are near the bottom of the food chain. That's very, very important to us and the rest of the environment. Many oaks, for example, can feed up to almost 500 different species of caterpillars. And yet you don't see leafless oaks. When I first went to plant school and we were taught this plant is not bothered by anything, only to find out with years that is true because it's from someplace else and the local insects don't know how to eat it. So it may not have holes in the leaves, but it's not feeding anything either. And just a little trivia point for the day. A lot of us like to watch songbirds. We might have bird feeders or bird baths out. Your basic mama bird collects hundreds, like 300 to 500 caterpillars per day for their chicks. Baby birds cannot eat birdseed. Baby birds cannot eat like a beetle, too hard. So the best thing is a caterpillar. They're soft for their baby bird beaks and they're full of fat and nutrition. They're kind of like a hot dog. I mean, baby birds like caterpillars. So we need to feed the birds. Next, please. So in 2019, a proponent of native plants looked out the back door of our church and saw all the honeysuckle and said, "You can clear that and plant native plants." We liked what they said, but we said, "You're crazy. There are 2 acres there. We could never do that." One man in his 70s heard this and said, "Yes, we can." So we did. It's still a work in progress, but most of the big honeysuckle is gone. And already we use the forest for meditation and education, as well as feeding the local critters, big and small. Next, please. In 2020, one man, a guest, who is visiting because of our Monarch Fest, saw our underutilized community garden and asked, "What are you doing with that? You could build a community instead of just feeding a few people." So another little aside, don't underestimate the power of one voice. So our forest, our reforestation, and our now community garden, all because 2 people asked a question. And just an aside, this may look like a bunch of weeds, but it is actually a 4-foot band all the way around the vegetable garden that had its pollinator plants as a place for the beneficial insects to hang out and the pollinators for the garden. But for the average person walking by, it didn't look good, but it was a very small garden and it didn't feed many people. Next. So now we have 7,600 square feet of turf that has been turned into growing food and building community. We build the soil in such a way to emphasize the feeding of the soil microorganisms that feed the plants. The new soil is built of weeds, grass clippings, free leaf compost, and a thin top dressing of topsoil. Also needs much less water because the rain actually infiltrates the soil instead of running off. Next. And I like the title of this, Gray Hair and No Money. Our church is predominantly senior citizens, and we built this entire garden with no money. So if people say, we can't do that, yes, you can. Next. And like Lyric, compost, compost, compost. We have some pretty extensive landscaping around the rest of the church, not to mention the garden. So we have lots of green material, well, and brown to add to our compost bin. And this is, at our church, we're trying to bring in people who are not from the church, as many people we can bring in from the neighborhood just to be part of our community. So people love bringing us their fall leaves, their pumpkins. So it's just the compost center has become fun. Next, please. So definitely share with others. So whether you have 8 acres like our church, or just a 1/4 acre, or maybe none, just concrete sidewalks, you can still share these techniques and this philosophy with others. So all these things that we have talked about are also in the quote, take-home tips from the sacred grounds that will be put in the chat box for you to copy and paste, use in your lives, share with friends. Next, please. So join us as we do little things throughout our day to walk lightly on the earth, being very respectful of all of the resources we use, organizing and recognizing their true costs. I love that Lyric brought that up. Join us as we use our grounds around our places of worship, our homes, the homes of friends and family, our businesses, etc. Not only more sustainably, but with time, maybe even restoratively, where our grounds can create more benefit community than what they consume. Build community amongst people and all of creation. This is what all of our faiths call us to do. The end.
Thank you, Susan. That was a really nice presentation, and you gave us so much information. Before we move on to our next segment of this session, which is the breakout rooms, I'd like to point your attention to the chat in which we have posted the link to take-home flyer of expert tips on sacred grounds, which we have prepared especially for your reference and use. The speakers have helped put that together. Please copy and paste that link somewhere safely on your device, and you can read it later. And now, friends, it comes the interactive part of today's event. We will divide the audience into 2 groups. One group will be with Susan Fox, and the other will be with Jason and Lyric. You will have the opportunity to ask our speakers your questions about sacred grounds, and also feel free to share your knowledge and experiences with your group about maintaining sustainable and eco-friendly grounds at your places of worship. You will be with your groups for about 15 minutes. After that, we will all gather together and we'll have some closing thoughts from our speakers. I think everybody should be back. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good session and you learned some things more from the speakers today. If you have more questions that you need to have answered, you can put them in the chat and we can come back to you and send you a response via email. Now, finally, we will hear from our speakers one last time, whatever the closing comments they have. So we'll go in the same order. Jason, you can start first, and then Lyric and Susan can follow.
Well, I was telling my breakout group that after you give a speech or a sermon, like for me, I always walk away and go, oh, what did I forget to say? What did I miss? What opportunity did I miss? I think the one thing that, and my talk was more just about kind of the administrative side, like as a leader, like what do you have to do to solve problems and to try to carry out and execute your vision and to let it manifest and happen. And one thing that I didn't say is, and I said know your why, but I would also say know, be able to articulate it. Really be able to say it in a way that is coherent and that is simple, but that is very profound and can connect, on a very, relational and personal level. Because what I found in my last few years is that I've had to talk about it all of the time, and I had time to develop it and to refine it. But I just think that's really important, and I think too, and something that I want to emphasize, something I said in the breakout group, is really emphasis on community collaboration. Like how can you collaborate with other people in your community? I mean, Lyric and I wouldn't be able to do the work we do. Our church wouldn't be able to do the work we do without Sue Plummer, without Gary Dangle, without the residents of our community, of it all working together to solve problems and to do this together. And that it's really important, is you're not alone there. And I've learned this from Joey Taylor, who's here tonight, is just really, how could, asking not only members of your congregation, but asking the residents in your neighborhood, what would they say? How would they solve it? And just really, and going and doing going to your community and learning from them and getting their input and their insight. Because, what I believe too is God is at work in our neighborhood, and we just need to identify where God is at work. And God is inspiring people that we have no idea who he or she, who God is inspiring. So that's how I would end my talk tonight.
Thanks, Jason. Lyric?
I'll just say really briefly, thank you everyone for being here. It's really meaningful to have all these people gathered in this way. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If anybody has additional questions or like technical specific questions or something, please feel free to ask. And then I'm also going to put in there that resource I mentioned, the Faithlands Toolkit. Again, I cannot recommend it enough. It's a beautiful document with so much information, and everyone should look at it. So thank you.
Thanks, Lyric. Susan?
You're muted, Susan.
Susan?
Sorry, thank you for that. So I too will put my email in the chat. So even if you think of a question way down the road, because there's a lot of complexities in all the stuff that we're talking about. You can't have one single simple answer that takes care of everybody's situation. That being said, there are so many things that most of us can do in our daily lives that really can make a difference, and realize that a lot of them are simple. Just by mowing your lawn a little bit differently, all those, I think it was Jason said that all of his neighbors put down stuff on their lawn. People do it without even thinking. They just think that's what you're supposed to do. They've never asked themselves, what are those hidden costs that are being paid by something or someone somewhere? And inevitably, it really is all of us in one way or another. Excuse me. So simple ways, but it is all about your frame of mind. The ground is sacred. If you think about that when you're walking on it, it makes a difference. When I walk across a big asphalt parking lot, I feel like I'm an alien, because that's not my environment, but I still have to walk across it to get from point A to point B. But to just really feel that we are part of the earth, not separate from it. just maybe this, I think, can really, really bring a lot of things home. In many indigenous languages in America and probably elsewhere too, there's, we have gender pronouns, he, she, and then there's it, and everything else isn't it. And that would be considered impolite to call a tree or water or the earth or an animal an it. It is alive. It has its sacred connections. It has things that it can bring to us. So in many of their languages, the only it is something that people make. A table, a pencil, those are its. But everything else are co-beings that we live with. So think of the world as sacred. And then when you realize that this is all family, I don't know about you, but I don't hurt my family. I like my family and I want them to prosper from this generation, all generations forth. So simple things, and remember, it's all sacred. So that's it.
Great. Thank you so much to all the speakers. I wanted to just point out one big thing that I took away. There was a lot of emphasis on community. I heard from a lot of speakers. And this ties into something I heard on NPR just a few days ago, that they did research on what are the things that impact a child's growth, and nature versus nurture, you heard. But what the data came out and said that even more than parents, it's a community that impacts the child's life. That was, I didn't know that. I thought parents are number one for a child's growth, but it's actually community. So what you all are doing and what we all are doing is so helpful, not just for our planet and to help our to help others, but even for our children. We are raising them in a community which is going to be very inspiring for them. So before we end, I wanted to thank a few people.
Joanne has a question.
Oh, sure. Joanne, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I wanted to say, first of all, that this was a beautiful presentation, very inspiring. I will say all three, but really Fred would be four presenters, did absolutely wonderful and gave us such good information and helpful and in a useful way. And I'm so grateful for that, as I'm sure everybody here is as well. And I want to add that we have several events coming up, some which you've heard about, some of which you have not. So you may want to jot down some pretty neat things that are coming up that we haven't posted yet. So one that is coming up and you should have heard about is the next Sunday, the 22nd, at the Mount Auburn Presbyterian Church. Is they are going to share with you how it is that they were able to inspire almost everybody in their congregation to support these wonderful things that they've done to make their building energy efficient, and to have retreats and teach individuals to live in better harmony with their environment. But they've even managed to put solar panels on their steep roof of a very old historic building in downtown area. And so there's lots to learn from them. That's next Sunday at 2 o'clock. You have to register, and that's easy to do. I've put the website on the chat at so it's just fcgg.org, which stands for Faith Communities Go Green, fcgg.org. That's so easy. It'll get to you there, and you can hit the link to register. On the June 12th, and this announcement will be coming out very soon. There will be, it's being organized by this group, the working group, the education working group. The movie will be the Revolution Generation. There will be a movie and discussion on June 12th at 5:30. And I highly recommend that you can watch the movie while you're eating dinner. It's a family affair, and just have fun and then join the discussion. The 16th and the 17th are the Midwest Regional Sustainability Summit. They do this every year. The registration is going on. If you go to Green Umbrella's website, you will find that information there. And so there are a few slots still open for the 16th. The 17th is wide open because I don't think they have a limit. And as a result, that's the day of field trips. So on the 16th, which is Thursday, there will be numerous presentations. There will be a major speaker keynote with mayors from 3 cities afterwards discussing the topics. And then there will be 2 breakout sessions. There will be several breakout sessions, but 2 of the breakout sessions are representing speakers from Faith Communities Go Green. Susan Fox, along with Susan Vogt, are on one of those presentations. And Susan, you might know your time. I don't know if you know your time yet. No, okay. And the other presentation I just learned was at 2 o'clock to 2:50, and that's on how to form a green team in your house of worship. And we feel that the main purpose of Faith Community Go Green is to get every congregation to form a green team so that you can do things and we can collaborate together. And what we do is we being Faith Communities Go Green, provides you the education and the tools of what your green team can do in your congregation. You can't work alone as a silo. If you want to say, go up to your leader of your congregation and say, I want to build a garden in my congregation. Well, they'll say, that's nice, go, it isn't going to happen. So you need people. You need a group of people, and that's your green team. Doesn't matter what their interest is, whatever their inspiration is, that's your green team. And please let us know when you have a green team formed. So the 2 field trips that we have happening on that date, and I'm sorry, I was thinking about this on the wing and I don't have the times right on my nose, but I'm believing at around 10 to 11, am I correct, for Susan's at the Westchester Church, and that's the field trip seeing what she spoke about today. And the other one, Ken, if you're available to tell me, I think it's at 2 o'clock, but again, I could be wrong because I don't have the sharpest memory in the world, is the Sisters of Charities at Mount St. Joe. And that will be looking at the building that's used for the Earth Connections and maybe other buildings. And they're talking about, they installed solar and geothermal and changed the windows and made everything very energy efficient. June 30th, we will be offering for the first time the Faith Community Go Green Book Club, and more of that information will follow. So lots is happening. This is an all volunteer organization. If you're not involved, because we need everybody to make things happen like this program, please let me know. And that would be just awesome. Or let Becca know and she'll let you, because we have
Thanks.
3 working groups. So find all the information online. There you go. Thank you, Fred, for that.
Finally, on behalf of Faith Communities Go Green, I'd like to thank Green Umbrella and Equation, to whom we are grateful for their support and help in every way to further our mission in our community. Friends, if you would like to join Faith Communities Go Green, please go to our website, fcgg.org, and join our team. Together, we can heal our planet faster. Finally, I would like to thank the audience for participating today. And have a good night, everyone. And thank you once again. Bye-bye.